It was a typical August evening in 2018, one of those warm nights where the air hangs thick with the scent of summer corn, and the cicadas buzz in a hypnotic rhythm. My wife, Eliza, and I had spent the day tending to our modest corn farm in Buckingham, Iowa. Our evenings were often filled with laughter and relaxation, especially after a long day of work. That particular night, we had invited our friends, Henry and his wife Lisa, over for a small get-together. We had indulged in a few too many drinks, sharing stories and memories until the sun dipped below the horizon, leaving a blanket of darkness draped over our little farm. As the clock struck midnight, we found ourselves sprawled on the couch, a little too tipsy and very much ready to sleep. The remnants of our laughter still lingered in the air, but an unexpected sound abruptly broke the cozy ambience. A firm, rhythmic knock echoed through the stillness of the night, sending a chill down my spine. I glanced at Eliza, who was nestled against my shoulder, her brow furrowed in confusion. "Did you hear that?" I whispered, straining to listen over the low hum of the fan whirring in the background. Eliza nodded, her eyes wide. "It's probably just the wind. You know how these old houses creak." But deep down, I knew something felt off. This wasn't a sound I was used to hearing on our quiet farm, especially at this hour. I rose from the couch, heart pounding in my chest, and made my way toward the door. The knocking persisted, more urgent now, punctuated by a voice muffled through the wood. "Hello? Is anyone there? We're lost and need help," the voice called out, shaky and laced with desperation. The words sent a shiver down my spine. I hesitated, glancing back at Eliza, who had now sat up, her eyes darting nervously around the dimly lit room. Something in that voice felt off. "Stay here," I instructed her, trying to sound more confident than I felt. I approached the door cautiously, peering through the peephole. But all I saw was darkness. "Who are you?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "What do you need?" The response came back quickly. "We're lost. My wife and I got separated from our group. We just need to use your phone." The voice sounded oddly high-pitched, and there was something about it that didn't sit right with me. "What's your wife's name?" I asked, hoping to catch them in a lie. There was a moment of silence before the voice replied. It's Jessica." I frowned, immediately sensing that they didn't really know the name of their wife. "Is this a joke? Is Henry with you?" "Yeah, that's right," they said, but the uncertainty in their tone was palpable. I took a step back, my mind racing. I reached for my phone and quickly dialed Henry's number. After a couple of rings, his groggy voice answered, and I could feel my heart race. "Henry, are you at home?" "No, I'm at home." "Why? What's going on?" he asked, his voice sharp with confusion. "There's someone at our door claiming they're lost. It doesn't feel right. Can you come over?" "On my way," he replied, and I hung up, my instincts screaming for me to be cautious. As I turned back to the door, the knocking continued, more frantic now. "Please, we just need help. We're really scared." Eliza was now standing behind me, her hand gripping my arm tightly. "What if they're telling the truth? What if they really are lost?" "But what if they're not?" I replied, my voice low but urgent. "What if they're trying to lure us out?" The uncertainty was suffocating. Just then, I heard a soft rustling outside, followed by footsteps moving along the side of the house. I glanced at Eliza, whose face was pale with fear. "Let's just call the police," she suggested, her voice trembling. Before I could respond, the voice outside grew louder. "We're not here to hurt you. We just need help. Go away," I shouted, adrenaline surging through me. "I have a gun, and I will use it." The silence that followed was deafening. I felt my heart racing as I glanced toward the windows. The darkness outside seemed to close in around us. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the side of the house, followed by a frantic banging on one of the windows. Eliza gasped, and I quickly grabbed her hand, pulling her back into the living room. "Get behind the couch," I instructed, my voice low but firm. As we crouched together, I heard the knocking transform into a frenzied pounding. "Let us in! We really need help!" My hands trembled around the phone as I dialed 911. The operator answered, and I quickly explained the situation, my voice shaky as I glanced toward the door. "There's someone outside trying to get in. I think they're dangerous. Stay inside and lock all the doors," the operator said, her voice steady and calm. "Help is on the way." I hung up, my mind racing as I tried to make sense of the chaos. The voice outside continued its relentless plea, but there was no way I was letting them in. Moments felt like hours as I listened to the chaos unfold outside. Just when I thought I couldn't take it any longer, headlights illuminated the yard. Relief washed over me as I recognized Henry's truck pulling into the driveway. "Stay here," I whispered to Eliza, and I crept toward the door, heart racing with every step. As I swung the door open, I was met with the sight of Henry, gun drawn, his face set in grim determination. "Where are they?" he demanded, scanning the area. "I don't know," I replied, glancing nervously around. "They were just here." We stepped outside together, the air thick with tension. Henry called out, but there was only silence in response. Suddenly, we heard the soft crunch of footsteps on gravel behind us. I turned, adrenaline spiking again. "Get back!" I shouted as I turned to see who was approaching, but it was just George, another neighbor, holding his shotgun, eyes wide with concern. "What the hell is going on?" he asked, glancing at Henry and then back at me. "Someone was just here, claiming to be lost," I explained, my voice low. "We need to check the house." The three of us cautiously made our way back inside, scanning every corner and shadow. It was eerily quiet, the weight of fear hanging in the air. The realization that we were alone, without knowing who or what had been outside, sent a shiver down my spine. Finally, the police arrived, their lights flashing brightly against the darkness, illuminating the area around our home. They swept through the property, checking every corner while we huddled together, still shaken by the night's events. After what felt like an eternity, the officers returned, shaking their heads. "We didn't find anyone. It seems like you may have just been targeted by someone looking to cause trouble." The unease settled in my gut as the officers urged us to install security cameras around our home. They left, but the feeling of vulnerability lingered, and I couldn't shake the image of that frantic figure outside our door. As we settled back on the couch, the weight of what had just happened hung heavy in the air. Eliza curled up against me, and I could feel her trembling slightly. "What if they come back?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. I couldn't help but wonder the same thing, the unsettling thought clinging to me like a shadow. Just a simple wooden door had kept us safe from whatever darkness lurked outside, and the idea that we could be so easily exposed sent chills coursing through my veins. The days that followed were marked by an uneasy tension in our home. The sun rose each morning, casting its warm light over our farm, but the shadows of that night lingered like a persistent fog. Eliza and I spent countless evenings sitting on the couch, watching the corn sway gently in the breeze, our laughter replaced by a heavy silence. We decided to install security cameras around the perimeter of our property, hoping that the added surveillance would bring some peace of mind. As we drilled the last screws into place, I couldn't shake the feeling that our safety was still just an illusion. The event had turned our once peaceful farm into a reminder of the dark unknown. One particularly gloomy evening, a storm rolled in, heavy rain drenching the ground. The sound of raindrops against the roof was soothing, but it also reminded me of that night, when the unexpected had shattered our sense of safety. Eliza had decided to go to bed early, leaving me alone with my thoughts. As I sat in the living room, watching the raindrops race down the window, I felt a sense of unease settle in. Then I heard it again, the faint sound of knocking. My heart dropped as I turned my head towards the front door. The memories of that night came rushing back, the fear flooding my veins. I told myself it was just the storm playing tricks on me, yet the sound persisted, echoing through the walls like a ghostly whisper. I grabbed my phone, heart racing as I considered calling the police once more. But then, a different voice broke through the pounding rain. It was a child's voice, soft and trembling. Please help me! A chill ran down my spine as I crept toward the door. Who's there? I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. Please, I'm lost! The voice pleaded again, full of despair. I hesitated, mind racing. Was this another trick? My instincts screamed at me to stay put, to ignore the cries for help. But the sound of that child's voice cut through my fear, sparking a flicker of empathy. I peered through the peephole again, but the darkness beyond was impenetrable. Suddenly, I felt a tug on my sleeve. Eliza stood behind me, her eyes wide with terror. What's happening? I quickly filled her in, and we shared a terrified glance. We should call the police, she whispered, gripping my arm tightly. But just as I was about to dial, the knocking intensified, now accompanied by a frantic scratching sound, as if something was trying to claw its way inside. Let me in! Please! The child's voice cried out, breaking my heart. Who are you? What's your name? I shouted back, trying to discern if this was truly a child in distress or another cruel ruse. Lucy, the voice replied. I can't find my way home. I turned to Eliza, whose face was pale with fear. What do we do? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I felt torn between the instinct to protect my family and the genuine concern for a lost child. We can't let anyone in, not after what happened before, I said, my heart heavy with indecision. But then, the knocking turned into pounding, frantic and desperate. Please! I'm scared! I don't want to be alone! The words sliced through my defenses, and before I knew it, I was stepping towards the door, my hand trembling as I reached for the knob. Eliza grabbed my arm, pleading with me to stop. What if it's a trap? She whispered, terror etched on her face. I have to see, I insisted, fighting against the surge of fear gripping me. As I opened the door just a crack, the rain poured in, and I was met with the sight of a small figure standing in the darkness. The girl looked no older than 8, her clothes drenched and her hair clinging to her face. Please, she said again, her voice cracking with fear. I can't find my mom. In that moment, I felt a pang of compassion overshadow my fear. Where did you come from? I asked, trying to gauge the situation. I don't know. I was playing outside, and now I'm lost. She whimpered, tears streaming down her cheeks. I glanced back at Eliza, who looked horrified but also uncertain. I knew we couldn't leave her out there. Come in, but stay by the door, I instructed, opening it wider. The girl stepped inside, shivering uncontrollably. I quickly closed the door behind her, the weight of the situation sinking in. What's your name? I asked again, trying to reassure her. Lucy, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Eliza handed her a blanket from the couch, and the girl wrapped it tightly around herself, eyes darting around the dimly lit room. I grabbed my phone and dialed the police, explaining the situation as quickly as I could. As I spoke, Lucy began to fidget, her gaze flickering toward the windows. Are you sure it's safe here? She asked, her voice trembling. Why wouldn't it be? I asked, surprised. Because I saw someone. They were watching me, she whispered, her eyes wide with fear. A cold shiver ran down my spine as I exchanged glances with Eliza, who looked just as frightened. What do you mean, Lucy? Where did you see them? In the trees, she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. They were standing there, just looking. I felt a lump form in my throat as I glanced toward the windows, the rain masking the view outside. What did they look like? I asked, trying to keep my tone calm. They were tall. And they wore a hood, Lucy said, her voice shaking. Eliza and I shared another terrified look, and I could feel the weight of fear pressing down on us like a heavy blanket. Stay here, Lucy, I said, my voice firm as I moved towards the window to peer out into the darkened yard. The rain fell heavily, obscuring my view, but I scanned the tree line, my heart racing. What are we going to do? Eliza whispered, her grip tightening around my arm. We wait for the police, I replied, but uncertainty crept into my voice. What if whoever had been out there was still lurking nearby? The minutes felt like hours as we waited, the sound of rain pounding against the roof only adding to the tension in the air. Lucy sat huddled on the couch, clutching the blanket tightly around her. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the sound of sirens pierced through the storm. Relief washed over me, and I rushed to open the door for the officers. As they entered, I quickly explained the situation, pointing to Lucy. The officers knelt down to her level, their faces calm and reassuring. "Hey there, sweetie. Can you tell us what happened?" Lucy glanced at me, her eyes filled with fear. "I don't want to go back out there," she cried. One of the officers nodded understandingly. "We're going to make sure you're safe. Can you tell us where you last saw your mom?" I don't know," she sobbed, burying her face in the blanket. The officers exchanged glances, and I felt the tension in the room rise again. "We'll need to check the area," one of them said, turning to the other. As they prepared to head out into the storm, I felt a sense of dread settle over me. What if Lucy was right? What if someone was out there, watching us? But there was no time to dwell on that as the officers stepped outside, leaving Eliza and me with Lucy. We both exchanged worried glances, silently acknowledging the fear that hung in the air. Minutes passed, and it felt like the storm itself was holding its breath. Suddenly, I heard a loud shout from outside. "Get back!" Panic surged through me as I grabbed Lucy's hand, pulling her close. "What's happening?" she cried, her eyes wide with fear. Before I could respond, the door burst open, and the officers rushed inside, looking alarmed. "You need to get to safety. We think there's someone out there." My heart dropped as I instinctively pulled Eliza and Lucy behind me. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice trembling. "They were hiding in the trees," one of the officers explained, breathing heavily. "We saw movement, but when we approached, they took off. We need to lock the doors and stay put." As we locked the doors, I felt the weight of fear settle heavily on my chest. The storm continued to rage outside, the wind howling like a ghostly wail. We huddled together in the living room, the tension thick in the air. The officers stayed vigilant, eyes scanning every shadow. "Do you think they'll come back?" Lucy asked, her voice shaking. I wanted to assure her, but the truth was, I didn't know. The sense of safety we had always felt in our home had been shattered, and the reality of our vulnerability felt all too real. Time crawled by, and the storm eventually began to let up, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. Finally, one of the officers received a call on his radio, and he stepped outside to speak with his partner. Eliza and I stayed close to Lucy, whispering words of comfort. But in the back of my mind, I couldn't shake the feeling that the threat was still out there, lurking just beyond the trees. When the officers returned, their faces were grim. "We haven't found anyone, but we need to keep the area secure. We'll be patrolling through the night," one of them said. As they settled in, I felt a mixture of relief and lingering dread. With Lucy safe in our home, I tried to focus on her well-being. "Let's play a game," I suggested, trying to lighten the mood. Lucy's face brightened slightly as Eliza pulled out a deck of cards. We played for a while, laughter slowly replacing the tension in the room. But the sense of unease never fully left. Every creak of the house felt amplified, and I kept glancing toward the windows, half expecting to see a shadow moving outside. Hours later, after Lucy had fallen asleep on the couch, the officers decided to leave for a moment to check the perimeter. Eliza and I sat in silence, tension hanging thick in the air. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from outside, making me jump to my feet. "What was that?" I exclaimed, heart racing. Eliza looked terrified as we rushed to the window, peering out into the darkness. The rain had stopped, but the eerie stillness felt suffocating. Then I saw it, a dark figure standing at the edge of the trees, watching us. My breath caught in my throat as panic surged through me. "Did you see that?" I gasped, pointing toward the window. But when Eliza looked, the figure was gone, swallowed by the shadows. "What was it?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I don't know," I whispered, dread pooling in my stomach. "But I have a feeling we're not alone." The tension was palpable as we waited, eyes fixed on the window, hearts racing with fear. And deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever darkness had visited us that night had not yet departed. As the night stretched on, our peaceful farm felt like a trap, and the shadows seemed to linger longer than before. I held Eliza close, knowing that the events of that fateful night would forever change our lives. And as the wind howled outside, I understood that safety is an illusion, one that can be shattered in an instant, leaving only fear and uncertainty in its wake. It was the summer of 2018, a time when everything felt carefree and bright. The sun painted the sky with hues of orange and pink as it sank below the horizon, casting long shadows across the fields of corn that stretched endlessly around my grandparents' farm in rural America. My grandparents, having decided to take a short trip out of town, had asked me to look after their property for a few days. Being the adventurous teenager I was, I jumped at the chance. I imagined it would be a few relaxing days filled with watching movies, taking care of the animals, and enjoying the peaceful sounds of nature. The first couple of days went by without incident. I would wake up early to tend to the animals, feeding the chickens and cows while enjoying the soft rustle of the leaves in the morning breeze. The old farmhouse creaked pleasantly as I moved about, and the familiar smells of hay and earth filled the air. I felt an odd sense of pride in keeping everything in order, just like my grandparents would have done. But on the third night, as I settled down in the living room to watch TV, a sense of unease began to creep in. It was a warm evening, and the sounds of the night surrounded me, crickets chirping, an occasional owl hooting in the distance. Just as I started to get engrossed in a show, I heard a strange noise coming from the cornfield. At first, I brushed it off as nothing more than the wind rustling the leaves or perhaps a deer wandering close by. However, the sound grew louder, an unsettling rustling followed by a sudden chorus of distressed moos from the herd. I jumped up from the couch, my heart racing. Something was wrong. The cows were spooked, and their frantic calls sent chills down my spine. I grabbed my grandfather's hunting rifle, feeling the weight of it in my hands. It was an old piece but held significant memories, and it gave me a sense of security as I stepped out into the dark. The cool night air hit my face, and the stars twinkled above like distant beacons. I made my way towards the barn, feeling the gravel crunch under my boots. Upon entering, I was met with an eerie silence. I counted the cows, and my stomach dropped. One was missing. The last time I had seen Bessie, she was tied up in her usual spot. Panic rose in my chest. I stepped outside again, the vastness of the cornfield looming before me. Then I heard it, a low, deep bellow echoing from the direction of the corn. A shiver ran down my spine, and I cautiously moved toward the sound. As I walked, my mind raced with possibilities. Was it just a stray animal? Or something worse? Suddenly I heard voices, strange and distant, murmuring in a language I didn't understand. My pulse quickened as I moved closer, each step feeling heavier than the last. In an effort to assert my presence, I fired 2 warning shots into the air. The loud blast shattered the stillness, but the rustling and the voices didn't stop. Instead, it seemed to intensify. My heart was pounding so loud I could barely hear anything else. My instincts screamed at me to run back to the safety of the house, but curiosity mixed with fear drove me forward. As I ventured into the rows of corn, the towering plants swayed ominously around me. I felt small and exposed. The voices became clearer now, a chant-like rhythm that sent shivers down my spine. I finally spotted them, a group of 6 or 7 figures clad in dark clothing, their faces hidden beneath bizarre masks. They moved with an unnatural fluidity, surrounding a small fire that flickered ominously in the middle of the field. "Get away from here!" I shouted, my voice shaking. Instead of scattering, they turned toward me, their movements eerily synchronized. One of them stepped forward, raising a hand as if to calm me, but fear overtook me. I pulled the trigger again, sending a shot into the air, hoping to frighten them away. But they didn't flinch. Instead, they began chanting louder, the words unintelligible yet haunting. It felt like a scene from a nightmare, and I was its unwilling spectator. My instincts kicked in, and I turned to run, firing 6 shots into the air as I fled, desperate to escape whatever malevolent force had intruded on my night. I heard the hurried footsteps behind me but didn't dare look back. All I could think about was getting to safety. As I dashed through the corn, branches whipped against my skin, and I stumbled through the dark. I finally broke free from the rows of corn and sprinted toward the farmhouse, lungs burning and heart racing. Just as I reached the porch, I skidded to a halt, horrified by what lay before me. In the dim light, I saw a grotesque scene, a candlelit circle on the ground, and at its center, the severed head of Bessie, my missing cow, staring up at me with lifeless eyes. I froze, disbelief mingling with terror. My legs felt like lead, and I stumbled backward into the house, slamming the door behind me. I scrambled to dial 911, my hands trembling violently as I explained the situation to the operator, my voice barely above a whisper. Panic coursed through me as I awaited help. My mind raced, trying to comprehend what had just happened. Who were those people? What had they done? And why here, at my grandparents' farm? The police arrived quickly, their flashing lights illuminating the darkness around the farm, creating an atmosphere that felt both reassuring and frightening. I rushed outside to meet them, still shaking with the adrenaline of the night. I could barely speak, but I managed to tell them about the masked figures, the chanting, and, of course, the horrific sight of Bessie's head. The officers listened intently, their expressions shifting from concern to grim determination. They cordoned off the area around the candlelit circle, examining the scene closely. I felt a mix of relief and dread as they assured me they would investigate the matter thoroughly. Yet, deep down, I knew that the shadows of that night would linger long after the police left. As they conducted their search, I felt the weight of eyes upon me, the curious gazes of my neighbors, who had gathered nearby, whispering amongst themselves. Their expressions were a mixture of concern and fear, a reminder that this small community had been shaken to its core. I couldn't help but feel the gnawing sense of isolation, as if I were the only one who truly understood the horror I had just witnessed. After what felt like an eternity, the police returned, their faces serious. They informed me that they hadn't found anyone else in the fields, and their search for the masked figures turned up nothing. They assured me that a more extensive investigation would follow, but I could see the uncertainty in their eyes. They spoke of potential cult activity, something I had only ever heard of in movies, never thinking it would invade my life. My parents arrived shortly after, their worry evident on their faces as they rushed to my side. I felt a strange mix of comfort and shame. I was supposed to protect the farm, not become its victim. My mother hugged me tightly, and I could feel the warmth of her love wrapping around me like a shield. "We're taking you home," my father declared, his voice firm, leaving no room for argument. As we drove away, I glanced back at the farmhouse, a place that had always felt safe and welcoming now transformed into a sight of unspeakable terror. The police remained on site, their vehicles contrasting sharply against the serene backdrop of the farm, a reminder that things had irrevocably changed. In the days that followed, the farm felt different. My grandparents returned, shocked by what had transpired. They immediately installed an advanced security system, cameras monitoring every corner of the property. Though their concern was palpable, I could sense an underlying determination to reclaim their peace. I admired their strength but felt a heaviness in my heart. However, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had happened that night wasn't over. Despite the cameras, I sensed a lingering presence in the fields. The corn stalks rustled even when the wind was still, and shadows flickered at the corners of my vision. My dreams were plagued by nightmares of masked figures, chanting in a language that felt ancient and sinister. I found myself waking in a cold sweat, heart racing, haunted by the echoes of that night. Weeks passed, and the police investigation yielded no answers. The small-town gossip mill churned with theories, each more bizarre than the last. Some believed it was a local cult, others claimed it was a prank gone wrong. The truth was, I knew what I saw, but who would believe a terrified teenager over the whispers of suspicion? One evening, as I sat on the porch watching the sunset, I felt a strange compulsion to venture into the fields again. It was a beautiful night, the sky painted with stars, but there was an unsettling stillness that hung in the air. I hesitated but ultimately decided I needed closure, a chance to confront my fears. As I stepped into the rows of corn, the night was eerily quiet. Each step I took seemed to amplify my heartbeat, and I felt the weight of unseen eyes upon me. I wandered deeper into the field, the moon casting long shadows that danced among the stalks. Suddenly I heard it again, the soft murmur of voices drifting through the air. My breath hitched, and panic surged within me. I turned to leave, but the rustling intensified, echoing in a way that felt almost like laughter. It was then that I saw them, figures emerging from the darkness, wearing those same sinister masks. My heart dropped, and I stumbled backward, feeling the sharp edge of fear gripping my throat. "Get away from me!" I screamed, the sound echoing in the stillness. The figures halted, their heads tilting as if considering my words. They didn't chant this time, instead standing in a circle, their presence suffocating. I felt an overwhelming urge to flee, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. In a moment of sheer desperation, I raised my phone and hit record, hoping to capture something, anything, that could help explain the terror I felt. But just as I began to speak, the figures raised their hands, and a wave of silence fell over the field, pressing in on me like a heavy fog. "Leave," one of them finally said, their voice distorted and echoing strangely. "You are not one of us." My heart raced, and the fear became palpable. I turned and ran, adrenaline fueling my escape. As I broke free from the corn, the figures faded back into the darkness, but their presence lingered like a ghostly whisper. That night I didn't sleep. I recorded my encounter, shaking as I relayed everything to the camera, desperate to make sense of it all. The next morning, I shared the footage with the authorities. They were hesitant, but there was a change in their demeanor, a newfound seriousness in their investigation. In the days that followed, the unease settled over the farm like a thick blanket. My grandparents, while grateful for the added security measures, couldn't shake the feeling that the danger was still out there. They began discussing selling the farm, a prospect that filled me with a sense of loss I hadn't expected. Months passed, and as autumn began to creep in, the atmosphere shifted. The days grew shorter, and the nights longer, accompanied by the unsettling memories of that summer night. I found myself standing at the edge of the cornfield, watching as the harvest approached. In the shadows, I felt eyes upon me again. Though I never saw the masked figures again, I couldn't help but feel their presence in the rustling leaves. I understood then that the events of that night would forever haunt me, a chilling reminder that darkness can sometimes creep into the most unexpected places. Ultimately, my grandparents sold the farm, moving to a small town where they could find peace. I moved with them, hoping to escape the nightmares that plagued my mind. Yet, no matter where I went, the memories of that fateful summer lingered, a ghostly reminder of the unknown forces that lay hidden beneath the surface of our reality. Even now, years later, I often find myself glancing over my shoulder, wondering if the shadows will come alive again, whispering secrets only they can understand. I learned that sometimes, the most frightening things aren't the monsters we can see, but those we can't. And that summer night, beneath the stars, left an indelible mark on my life, a haunting I would never forget. It was a balmy summer night in rural Ohio when I found myself alone on the family farm. My parents had taken a much-needed vacation, leaving me, at 25, in charge of the place along with my two younger sisters, Lila and Zoe. The air was thick with the scent of freshly cut grass, and the stars twinkled overhead like tiny diamonds scattered across a velvet canvas. We had just finished dinner, and the three of us were sprawled on the couch, watching a cheesy horror movie that made us giggle more than scream. As the clock struck 10, the laughter faded, and an uneasy stillness settled over the farm. I could hear the crickets chirping outside, the occasional rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze, and then suddenly, a sharp yelp broke through the calm. Our two dogs, Max and Bella, who had been lounging by the door, perked up and began barking furiously. I shot a glance at Lila and Zoe, who exchanged worried looks. "What's got into them?" Lila asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know, but it sounds serious," I replied, my stomach knotting with anxiety. I rose from my seat, a sense of dread creeping in as I approached the door. The barking intensified, the dogs straining against their leashes as if they wanted to bolt outside. I opened the door and stepped out into the cool night air. The dogs dashed ahead, their barking echoing off the cornfields that surrounded our property. I squinted into the darkness, trying to see what had caused the commotion. That's when I heard it, a distant, eerie whistling. It was almost melodic, but there was something distinctly unsettling about it. I froze. Who could be out here, whistling in the dark? I felt a chill run down my spine. Max and Bella were now fixated on something in the distance, their bodies tense, ready to pounce. I took a deep breath and stepped further out into the yard, the grass cool beneath my bare feet. "Stay here!" I called to the dogs, but they were already pulling me toward the sound. I made my way closer to the edge of the cornfield, my heart racing as I strained to listen. The whistling continued, and I felt an overwhelming sense of vulnerability in the night. Then, without warning, the whistling stopped. In the eerie silence that followed, I could hear the wind rustling through the leaves and the distant sound of crickets. My instincts screamed at me to turn back, but curiosity kept me rooted in place. That's when I saw him, a figure standing at the edge of the cornfield, just beyond the reach of the porch light. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice shaky but loud enough to echo across the yard. The figure didn't move, just stood there, shrouded in darkness, and I felt a wave of panic wash over me. Lila and Zoe had come to the door, peering out with wide eyes. "What's going on?" Zoe asked, her voice trembling. "I don't know." "There's someone out there!" I yelled back, my pulse racing. Instinctively, I dashed back inside to grab my dad's hunting rifle, which I had never really expected to use. As I hurried back, I heard the soft sound of footsteps, the kind that seemed to melt into the night. My hands trembled as I clutched the gun, hoping it wouldn't come to that. "Howard, don't go out there!" Lila cried, panic in her eyes. "I have to see who it is. If they're trespassing, I can't just let them roam around," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. I took a deep breath, steadied my nerves, and stepped back outside, the cool metal of the rifle grounding me somewhat. The dogs had quieted down, and an unsettling stillness hung in the air. "Hey! Get off my property!" I shouted, aiming the rifle toward the dark shape in the cornfield. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then I heard the whistling again, but this time it was louder, more deliberate. The figure took a step back, almost as if it was taunting me. I squeezed the trigger and fired a shot into the air. The loud bang echoed through the night, and I felt a surge of adrenaline rush through me. The figure disappeared into the cornfield, and the dogs began barking again, but the sound was different this time, more of a warning than a challenge. I felt the girls move closer to me, their presence grounding me in that moment of confusion and fear. "What should we do?" Zoe asked, her voice shaking. "Let's go inside," I said, feeling the weight of responsibility pressing down on me. I ushered Lila and Zoe back into the house and locked the door, leaning against it for a moment to catch my breath. "Do you think he'll come back?" Lila asked, her eyes wide with fear. "I don't know, but we need to be prepared just in case," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. I called Dad, my hands still shaking. "There's someone out here, Dad. I think they were trying to mess with us." His voice on the other end was calm but firm. "You need to protect your sisters, Howard. If he comes back, shoot another warning shot. But don't engage him directly. Keep the girls safe." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "I will. Thanks, Dad." After we hung up, I felt the weight of his words settle in. I took the dogs and led them into the living room, where the girls had already cuddled up on the couch, each holding a pillow tightly as if it could shield them from the unknown. I joined them, placing the rifle beside me, scanning the windows for any sign of movement outside. As the night wore on, I tried to distract Lila and Zoe with light-hearted stories, but the earlier incident loomed over us, a heavy blanket of anxiety. I could see the fear in their eyes, mirroring my own dread. The shadows outside danced eerily, and every creak of the house sent a shiver down my spine. Eventually, we decided to turn in for the night. I felt a strange sense of unease as I locked the door behind us, the darkness outside feeling more like a living thing, waiting, watching. In my room, I sat on the edge of my bed, the rifle resting against the wall beside me. I could still hear the faint rustle of the cornfield, and as I lay back, my mind raced with questions. Who was that man? What did he want? The thought of someone lurking in the shadows sent chills through me. As sleep began to claim me, I promised myself that I would keep my sisters safe, no matter what. The next day dawned bright and sunny, a stark contrast to the turmoil of the night before. I woke up feeling exhausted, but I forced myself to get out of bed. Lila and Zoe were already in the kitchen, bickering over who would pour the cereal. I joined them, grateful for the normalcy of their squabbles. "Did you see anything last night?" Lila asked, looking up at me with her big, innocent eyes. "Just some strange whistling," I replied, trying to downplay my fear. "But we're fine now." We finished breakfast, and as we cleaned up, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I glanced out the kitchen window toward the cornfield, half expecting to see that dark figure lurking among the stalks. But nothing seemed amiss. Still, a knot of anxiety twisted in my stomach. "Let's take the dogs for a walk," I suggested, hoping some fresh air would clear my mind. Lila and Zoe agreed, and we leashed up Max and Bella, stepping out into the warm sunlight. The morning was peaceful, the birds chirping, and the smell of dew-kissed grass filled the air. As we walked along the dirt path that lined the edge of our property, I tried to push the night's events from my mind. We made our way to the nearby creek, where we let the dogs splash around in the shallow water. Laughter filled the air, and for a moment, everything felt normal again. But as we started heading back, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Suddenly, Max and Bella perked up, their ears twitching as they turned their heads toward the cornfield. I felt my heart race as I followed their gaze. There, at the edge of the field, stood the same figure from the night before, watching us with an unsettling stillness. "Howard, what is that?" Zoe whispered, her voice trembling. I felt the color drain from my face as I instinctively pulled my sisters behind me. "Stay back!" I shouted, raising the rifle as my heart pounded in my chest. The figure didn't move, just stood there, whistling that same haunting melody. I felt a cold sweat break out across my brow. "What do you want?" I yelled, trying to sound braver than I felt. But there was no answer, only the sound of the whistling growing louder, echoing through the field. The dogs began barking, their growls low and threatening, as they sensed the tension in the air. "Howard, let's go!" Lila pleaded, tugging on my arm. "No, we can't leave. He's on our property," I said, my voice steady despite the panic rising within me. Suddenly, the figure began walking toward us, slow and deliberate. I raised the rifle, my finger hovering above the trigger, unsure of what to do. "Stay back! I'll shoot!" I warned, my voice cracking. But the figure only continued to approach, still whistling that haunting tune. My mind raced, the adrenaline coursing through my veins as I tried to process the situation. Was he a trespasser? A threat? Or just some sick prankster? In that moment of hesitation, something primal kicked in. I pulled the trigger, firing a shot into the ground at his feet. The loud bang startled him, and he stumbled back, momentarily taken aback. "Get inside!" I shouted to my sisters, urgency lacing my words. They didn't need to be told twice. I turned and sprinted toward the house, the dogs trailing closely behind us. As we burst through the door, I slammed it shut and locked it tight, my heart pounding in my chest. We huddled together in the living room, the rifle still clutched in my hands. "What was that?" Lila gasped, her eyes wide with terror. "I don't know," I admitted, trying to catch my breath. "But we need to stay alert. He could come back." As the day wore on, we kept the curtains drawn, peering out from behind them every now and then. I felt a growing sense of paranoia settle over me. What if he was watching us, waiting for the perfect moment to strike? The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the yard, and the atmosphere grew heavy with tension. I felt like a guard on watch, constantly scanning the windows, waiting for any sign of movement. When night fell, I gathered my sisters in the living room, the rifle resting in my lap. "We'll stay together," I reassured them, though I could feel the tremor in my voice. Suddenly, the dogs began to bark again, their fur bristling as they stood at attention. I looked out the window and saw him again, that same figure, standing at the edge of the cornfield, whistling softly in the darkness. My heart raced as I grabbed the rifle, pointing it toward the window. "Get down!" I shouted as I pulled the trigger once more, the shot reverberating through the stillness of the night. The figure didn't flinch. Instead, he took a step forward, still whistling that damn tune, as if mocking me. Panic surged through me, and I felt my grip on reality slipping. "Howard, what do we do?" Lila cried, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Stay quiet and stay low," I ordered, my voice rising in urgency. I could feel my hands shaking as I fumbled with the rifle, my mind racing with possibilities. Time seemed to stretch as we crouched together, the sound of the whistling echoing in our ears. I could hardly breathe, the weight of the situation bearing down on me like a lead blanket. The darkness felt alive, as if it were closing in around us, suffocating and oppressive. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the whistling stopped. The silence that followed was deafening, and I felt a sense of dread creep into my bones. I waited, straining to hear anything beyond the pounding of my heart. Then, a soft knock at the door shattered the silence. I felt my breath catch in my throat. "Howard?" It was a voice I recognized, my dad's. "It's me." "Open up!" Relief flooded through me as I hurried to the door, unlocking it and flinging it open. My dad stepped inside, his face etched with concern. "What happened?" I quickly recounted everything, the whistling, the figure, the shots. He listened intently, his brow furrowed in thought. "We need to call the sheriff," he said finally, his voice steady. As I dialed the number, I glanced outside one last time. The figure was gone, swallowed by the darkness of the cornfield. The sheriff arrived shortly after, armed and serious. He listened as I explained the events of the night, taking notes and asking questions. "We'll patrol the area," he assured me. "You're not the first to report strange happenings around here. Stay vigilant and keep your doors locked." As the sheriff left, I felt a sense of uncertainty settle over me. Who was that man? Why had he been watching us? Later that night, as we huddled together in the living room, the weight of the day's events settled heavily on our shoulders. I promised myself that I would protect my sisters, no matter what it took. But as I lay in bed that night, the darkness feeling heavier than ever, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Something was out there, lurking just beyond the edges of our safe little world, waiting for its moment to strike. My name is Walter Jennings, and I've been a farmer all my life, just like my father and his father before him. I live in a quaint, little town called Willow Creek, nestled in the heart of Ohio. The rolling fields of corn and wheat stretch endlessly, swaying gently in the breeze, casting a tranquil and picturesque scene during the day. But beneath the surface of this idyllic life lies a darkness I never expected to confront. It all started one autumn evening when I was out in the fields, tending to my crops as the sun dipped below the horizon. The air was crisp, and the golden rays of sunlight began to fade, giving way to the eerie silence that often follows dusk. I always enjoyed the peacefulness of the evening hours. It was a time for reflection, for me to think about the harvest and the long months of labor ahead. However, on this particular evening, something felt different. An unsettling chill crept into the air, sending shivers down my spine. As I walked through the rows of corn, my boots crunching softly against the dry earth, I noticed a flickering light in the distance, beyond the edge of my property. It was strange. There were no houses or farms for miles, only the thick woods that bordered my fields. I squinted, trying to make out what it was, but the light seemed to flicker and fade, as if beckoning me closer. Curiosity got the better of me, and I began to head toward it, my heart pounding with each step. The woods were thick and dark, the branches twisting together like gnarled fingers reaching out to grab me. I could hear the rustling of leaves, a sound that seemed to whisper secrets I couldn't decipher. The flickering light grew brighter as I ventured deeper into the woods, and soon I found myself standing in a small clearing. There, in the center, was an old, decrepit lantern, its flame flickering weakly. The light cast eerie shadows that danced across the trees, creating a sinister atmosphere that sent a jolt of fear through me. Suddenly, I felt a presence behind me. I turned sharply, but nothing was there, just the oppressive silence of the woods. My instinct screamed at me to leave, but I was paralyzed by a mix of fear and curiosity. As I stood there, I could feel the temperature drop even further, the air thickening around me. It was then I noticed something strange. The lantern was not just an ordinary lantern. It was adorned with intricate carvings of faces, contorted in expressions of anguish and despair. As I examined it closer, a sudden gust of wind swept through the clearing, extinguishing the flame. Panic surged through me, and I fumbled to find my way back, but the once familiar path seemed to twist and shift in the darkness. The shadows grew longer, the trees closing in around me, as if they were alive and closing in to trap me. I sprinted back toward the farm, the echoes of unseen footsteps chasing me, the air thick with the stench of decay. When I finally burst through the door of my farmhouse, gasping for breath, I locked the door behind me, convinced that whatever I had encountered was far from ordinary. I tried to rationalize it, telling myself that it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew there was something sinister lurking in those woods. For days after that incident, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I would glance out the window, expecting to see shadows moving in the corner of my eye, but nothing was ever there, at least, not that I could see. The land felt heavy, the crops growing more and more sparse as the days passed, as if the earth itself was dying. I started hearing whispers in the wind, low and menacing, like voices calling me back to the woods. It all came to a head one fateful night when a storm rolled in. The wind howled like a banshee, rattling the windows of my home. Lightning flashed, illuminating the darkened corners of my house, and thunder boomed like the roar of an angry beast. As I sat in the dim light of my living room, trying to calm my nerves with a book, I heard it, a knock at the door. It was a slow, deliberate sound, echoing through the howling wind. My heart raced as I exchanged glances with my reflection in the darkened window. "It's just a storm," I whispered to myself, but deep down, I knew that it was more than just the weather. I could feel it in my bones, a primal instinct telling me that something was very wrong. I hesitated, torn between fear and curiosity, but eventually, I got up and approached the door. I could feel my hands trembling as I reached for the doorknob. Just as I was about to open it, another knock echoed through the house, this one more insistent, more demanding. In that moment, I knew I was being called, drawn towards something that I couldn't understand. I took a deep breath and opened the door, half expecting to find someone standing there. But the storm outside was fierce, and there was no one in sight, just the swirling wind and rain. It was then that I heard it, a whisper carried on the wind, soft yet clear. "Come find me." I slammed the door shut, my heart racing. I locked it again, feeling a wave of nausea wash over me. Whatever was happening was no coincidence. It was as if the very land was alive and holding secrets I was never meant to uncover. I sat in the darkness, clutching my hands tightly, desperate to keep the darkness at bay, but I could feel it creeping in, seeping through the cracks of my sanity. Days turned into weeks, and the feeling of dread grew heavier with each passing moment. I avoided the woods at all costs, even as the whispers called to me. My crops continued to wither, and the once vibrant land was turning brown and lifeless. It was as if the life force of my farm was being drained, leaving me with nothing but despair. One evening, as I sat at the kitchen table, I noticed something strange outside. The lantern from the clearing, the one I had seen that fateful night, was glowing faintly in the distance, My heart raced as I realized it was standing right at the edge of my property, illuminating the darkness like a beacon. Against my better judgment, I felt a compulsion to go to it, an irresistible pull that I couldn't fight. With every step toward the light, a sense of foreboding washed over me. The closer I got, the more I could hear the whispers, a cacophony of voices, calling my name, urging me to come closer. As I approached the clearing, I felt the atmosphere change, charged with an energy that was both exhilarating and terrifying. I stood before the lantern, its flame flickering wildly in the night air, casting shadows that twisted and turned. And then I saw them, faces emerging from the darkness, swirling around me like ghosts. They looked familiar, but I couldn't place them. Panic surged through me as I realized they were faces of the land, of the people who had once lived and worked this soil. "Walter!" a voice called, deep and resonant, echoing through the clearing. It felt as though it was coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. "You have awakened us." I stumbled back, fear gripping my heart. "What do you want?" I shouted into the darkness. "Leave me alone!" But the shadows only grew thicker, surrounding me, their whispers growing louder. "You are one of us now, Walter. The land has chosen you." I fell to my knees, the weight of their words crashing over me like a tidal wave. The truth began to dawn on me. My family had been farmers for generations, and with each generation, the land demanded a sacrifice. I was no different. I was the latest in a long line of custodians, bound to the soil and its secrets. Suddenly, a vision hit me like a lightning bolt. I saw the farm through the eyes of my ancestors, saw their struggles and sacrifices, their victories, and their failures. But most importantly, I saw what had happened to those who ignored the land's call. They had been consumed, their souls trapped in the very soil they had worked. The realization was a punch to the gut. I understood now that the whispers were not just a warning, they were a call to action. The land needed me, but it demanded something in return. I could feel the power surging through me, the energy of the earth intertwining with my very being. As the shadows closed in, I felt an overwhelming urge to respond. "What do I have to do?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I will do anything to save my farm." The shadows parted, revealing a path leading deeper into the woods. "Follow the path of sacrifice," the voices urged. "Embrace the darkness to restore the light." With no other choice, I stood up, determination washing over me. I stepped onto the path, the lantern lighting my way, and as I moved forward, the darkness enveloped me. I could feel the presence of the land guiding me, urging me onward. The woods twisted and turned, branches reaching out like fingers trying to pull me back, but I pressed on. The whispers grew louder, echoing through the trees, urging me to confront my fears, to face the truth buried deep within my soul. Eventually, I arrived at a clearing where the air was thick with energy. In the center stood an ancient tree, its gnarled roots sprawling like veins across the ground. I could feel the history of the land coursing through it, the weight of the sacrifices made by those who had come before me. "Here lies the heart of the farm," the voices whispered. "You must give yourself to the land." Trembling, I stepped closer, my heart pounding in my chest. I felt a surge of fear but also an unyielding sense of purpose. I understood that in order to save my farm, I had to become part of it, an eternal guardian bound to the earth. With a deep breath, I placed my hands on the tree and closed my eyes. I felt a connection unlike anything I had ever experienced, a bond that tied me to the very essence of the land. I could see visions flash before me, my ancestors, their sacrifices, their love for the land. The pain of the past mingled with the hope for the future, and in that moment, I understood that I was never alone. As I embraced the darkness, a warmth enveloped me, filling the void of despair that had consumed me for so long. The whispers faded, replaced by a sense of peace and understanding. I opened my eyes, and the tree glowed with an ethereal light, illuminating the clearing and the surrounding woods. I returned to the farm that night, but I was forever changed. The land was alive again, vibrant and full of energy. My crops flourished as if rejuvenated by my sacrifice. The shadows that had once haunted me faded away, leaving only a lingering sense of purpose. And so, as the sun rose over Willow Creek, I embraced my role as a steward of the land, knowing that the darkness would always be a part of me, just as the light would guide me. I had become a guardian, bound to the very soil I had feared, and I vowed to protect it for generations to come. The land had called to me, and I had answered, embracing both the light and the darkness that lay within.